retro future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard the Weird Train of Thought, where I take you on a journey through my thoughts on various subjects regarding history and science fiction. There's a lot of confusion on what is and what isn't steampunk. It surely doesn't help we've seen steampunk-ish or steampunk-inspired elements in fantasy movies and games, like World of Warcraft and The Elder Scrolls. Steampunk fantasy has become a genre in itself. There are a lot of names for it though. Industrial fantasy, gaslamp fantasy, a term coined by Phil and Katja Foglio, are probably the best well known. And these don't include the steampunk inspired settings and stories with heavy paranormal elements and popular monsters like werewolves, ghosts, vampires and whatnot. But we will not talk about those today. There is a reason why I consider steampunk pop culture in a historical setting rather than all those very definitions of steampunk out there, if applied at all. The whole idea of steampunk being cyberpunk in the past, as Bruce Sterling intended, is almost an afterthought these days, if applied at all. When looking at a wide range of visual productions like movies, series and even video games, how many of these explore the relationship between man and their mechanical creations? The only one I can name on the top of my head is Steam Boy. This is why I consider steampunk pop culture in a historical setting rather than all those very definitions of steampunk out there. The internet and self-publishing is probably the biggest contributor to the illusion of steampunk as a story genre. To get your story published, you don't need to adhere to the demands of publishers anymore. And shelf space isn't the issue as it used to be thanks to digital distribution. This allows for more creative freedom, however it also allowed writers to slap the term steampunk on anything they publish. In these cases, the term often refers to the aesthetic of the world and gadgets used, but not the themes and the conflicts of the story itself. Most of these stories would fall under fantasy or horror, although they take place in an alternative historical setting. More likely, it will include typical plots like revenge, damsels to be rescued, or the disposing of a tyrant. I'm looking at you, Dishonored. This is not a rant against these stories, by the way. The whole point of this digression is to show you why people have become confused about what steampunk is. For those outside the community, it's purely an aesthetic or visual theme, because it's the only thing that has remained consistent in their experience. The whole mechanical aspect is more of an aesthetic choice, something to impress the audience. And why not? It looks bloody awesome! All the bling, the moving parts combined with the historical sense of flair creates a timeless aesthetic that people have fallen in love with over the years. The reason why I mention this is because after giving a number of workshops and reading online discussions, I concluded a lot of people don't seem to get why we see steampunk inspired elements in fantasy, apart from the fact it looks awesome. Before I go on, I want to make one thing very clear. For the sake of simplicity, I do not make a distinction between steam, magic, rune, ether, or otherwise powered machines. Most mechanical creations in such settings are improbable anyway. And with that out of the way, let's begin. The first reason would be variety. When exploring old ruins of lost civilizations or tombs of forgotten kings, usually means undead galore, skeletons, ghosts, or a combination of the two with various degrees of power. Having these undead servants may be replaced by mechanical creatures is a good alternative to spice up a setting and allows for greater variation. This also allows for great stories. All the creation of undead armies requires is a curse or a tragic backstory, or a wizard that needed an army for some purpose, be it to guard a location or conquer the world.
Of course!
And why not? A single spell can raise an entire battalion after all. When you create a mechanical army in such a world, the wizard can still be the culprit, but even wizards need resources to build metallic armies. And civilizations need some extended knowledge to create such beings. No one walks into a lost city filled with robots and thinks, geez, these were some primitive people. As a matter of fact, in a lot of these settings no one else in the world can build such contraptions. This level of technology makes them stand out from most other races. And that should tell you something. Why are it, for example, dwarves that often have that level of technology? Did they inherit it from some mythical lost civilization? Was it the circumstances of their surroundings that required them to be more innovative? Or are they more interested in science and technology than most other factions, for cultural or ideological reasons? And why only them? Did they all keep this technological goodness for themselves? Or are the other groups just not interested in technology? Having such a civilization, dead or alive, in a world raises a lot of questions that makes the audience want to explore the world to find out how it fits in the grander narrative of the setting. Undead, on the other hand, often just exist. I could go on and on because there are so many story possibilities. How, for example, do other less advanced civilizations interact with this tech? Do they crave it? Is it heresy, or do they consider these devices nothing more than curiosities with little practical value? What often happens during the plot of fantasy stories, there is some major calamity that requires the protagonist to collect such ancient technology to save their kingdom. Either because it will protect them, or destroy some threat or enemy. This in turn could spark all kinds of conflicts between the characters and factions. Let's say the hero needs to collect an artifact similar to a nuclear bomb. This should cause some concern among people for different reasons. What if the artifact is so powerful it might destroy everyone? And that's just a practical concern. Is it ethical to use such a weapon or even reproduce it? What if the opposition got a similar weapon? Yeah, imagine a Cold War in a fantasy universe. Wouldn't that be something? Using steampunk-esque visuals to portray such advanced civilizations is a good show-don't-tell way to represent how advanced a civilization is compared to the rest of that world, while looking awesome. But is it steampunk? Here's my issue with this. Does steampunk have a monopoly on using gears and vintage in its aesthetic? No. The look already existed in pop culture way before the 90s, including in fantasy, when the first generation of steampunks arose. Steampunks simply made it their own after that. Maybe after the 2000s, people started to associate this more with steampunk than with other genres, because there was no other name for it. Also, no other group identified themselves as much as steampunks did with a particular style that has become so prevalent in pop culture. And they basically started claiming anything brown or with gears to be steampunk. What brings me back to the delusion of the genre at the beginning of this video. It doesn't help that the term like retrofuturism, retrotronics and other historically inspired styles are overlooked and get labeled as steampunk as well. To me, it all goes back to the question, where does the inspiration come from? For steampunks, it's mostly pop culture and history. For fantasy, it is also inspired by pop culture and history. Now we can say that fantasy gets many of its ideas from mythology, while steampunk draws from science fiction. There's no question that steampunk is very prevalent in both. And both genres are very popular right now. So it's no wonder both influence each other in equal measure. What brings us back to steampunk fantasy, or industrial fantasy, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I went full circle on that one. And this is why, dear viewers, I rather talk about something being steampunk inspired, rather than it being steampunk. There is no objective standard to what is and what isn't. Maybe in 50 years or so, when the movement has matured or died, we can put an end to that discussion. But right now, it's a living and breathing thing, and we might see its influence pop up in unexpected places. Thank you for listening, everyone, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions or don't agree, please leave a comment. You can help this channel by sharing it on your social media, and of course, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, make it your way.
Much of it the north, whereas it's dry, cold, dark, and red, and I prefer green, fresh, sun, earth texture.
For steampunk, for example, the future is one of the greatest inspirations. It's funny how something that hasn't happened yet can inspire such huge and massive creativity.
Don't have too much respect for the old literature and play with literature. That's what I would like everyone to do.
Get your stuff done. Get your stuff done. They're waiting on you.
Do it all once more. Watch me. I'm going to show you the next two parts right here.